everyone, and welcome to the Collegian Football Podcast. I'm Alexis Yoder, and I'm joined by Seth Engle. And Seth, first episode of the Collegian Football Podcast. I'm happy to have you here. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be Seth and I now. Justin has moved on from our show, but we still have a lot of Penn State football to talk about. Of course, we're going to start out with a brief recap of the Outback Bowl when Penn State fell to Arkansas. And a big story from this game that really stood out to me was the amount of young players from Penn State that played in this game that we haven't seen a lot of from this season. Penn State had 6 players on defense opt out in addition to Jahan Dotson on the offensive side of the ball. And there were a lot of young players, like I said, that we haven't really seen so far this season. So, Seth, who really stood out to you in this game among those players?
Yeah, so, you talk about the defense, and then obviously Jahan Dotson leaving on the offense. That opened up some room for Parker Washington to shine in the first half. When we go back to defense here, the first half, to me, looked pretty strong. Mm-hmm. Arkansas was throwing the ball, and it kind of gave a chance for Penn State's young players on the D line to not really rush on all these run plays, which they ended up calling in the second half. So I don't know, they were a little patient in the first half. I liked what I saw from Jordan Vandenberg. I liked what I saw from Smith Vilbert, who actually set an Outback Bowl record with 3 sacks in the first half of the Outback Bowl. Once the second half came around, Arkansas started to notice, okay, maybe the pass isn't going to work against this team as a strong secondary. Still, they're going to run the ball. They end up setting an Outback Bowl record for rushing yards. So that's what I saw there. You look at the veterans. You look at the seasoned veterans. Sean Clifford, about to be a 6th-year senior. What did you see from him at the Outback Bowl?
Yeah, statistically speaking, this was absolutely Sean Clifford's worst performance. I mean, just in all facets of the game, he just looked extremely uncomfortable in the pocket when he was trying to rush. And before he ended up leaving the game with what we think maybe, is it an injury? Was it just, I don't want to be in this game anymore? He left with a towel on his head, clearly just did not want any part of that game. And, he really did not turn in that strong of a performance for a veteran that he really needed to step up in this game, especially with the absence of Jahan Dotson and with how pitiful the run game has been. But could you really blame him? I mean, the offensive line, as we've seen towards the end of the season, has just been absolutely pitiful, and especially with the amount of veterans they have on that line, I think we all expected it to be a lot better than what it was, and it just simply was not that. But as you said, first game without Jahan Dotson, that really gave Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith a chance to shine, and I really think both of them turned in strong performances. I mean, we saw Parker Washington in the first half just make 2 extremely acrobatic catches, and I think that's a good sign of things to come for this team. But on defense, I really want to take a look at 2 players in their specifics. Jesse Luketa actually ended up opting out of using his extra year of eligibility and going to the NFL draft. I mean, we got to speak to him after the game. He said he hadn't made a decision. We go back up in the press box and we see Jesse Luketa announces his decision to go to the NFL. And we're like, okay, just asked you about this, but, I guess. But he absolutely raised his draft stock with the performance. I mean, he turned in 9 tackles, but just the intangible things that he did in that game for that young defense were just incredible, and I think that's good signs to come for him in the NFL. And then also Jair Brown, first game without playing next to Jaquan Brisker. He had 2 interceptions and really led a strong performance for that Penn State secondary. So I think that all things considered, good performance for the Penn State defense. We'll see what happens with the offense. We're going to get into that a little later with what they have coming in. But, not all negatives from this Outback Bowl. But we did get to see some new pieces in the coaching realm go into Penn State's coaching staff as Manny Diaz was hired to replace Brent Pry as a defensive coordinator. To me personally, I don't think they could have made a better hire than this. I mean, he has just been an amazing person as a defensive coordinator during his time at Miami. Didn't really do that great as a head coach at Miami, but he's proven success in the role as a defensive coordinator and a play caller. Personally, I want to see the turnover chain make its way to Happy Valley in some form or fashion, but his defenses have just been statistically some of the best as he's been the coordinator in the country. So I'm excited to see if that translates here at Penn State.
Yeah. And you talk about the positives of the Outback Bowl, and you talk about Jair Brown. That's a guy, when you're a new defensive coordinator coming to town, when you see a guy like Jair Brown who's able to make, have a heck of a game in a bowl game, kind of by himself deep in the secondary there, and he's doing that with an interim defensive coordinator, you love to see that if you're Manny Diaz. Another thing with Diaz coming in is this really opens up Penn State's ability to recruit not just in straight-up high school recruiting, but also in the transfer portal. This guy he's spent a lot of his time in the South, primarily in Texas and in Florida, and that's where Penn State's going to, really need to open up their recruiting. They've owned Pennsylvania for this part of the recruiting cycle, and a lot of the Northeast, like Maryland, but there are big parts of the country that I think we could see start to open up as this offseason goes along. When talking about the transfer portal, there are a couple big names that have left Penn State, and there are also a couple big names being tied to the Nittany Lions as we speak. You want to talk a little bit about some of these guys who have left the program recently?
Yeah, for sure. Noah Cain this morning, he reportedly put his name in the portal. I mean, after just such a pitiful season. I think he really had such high standards for himself this season. He just did not live up to them. So I think a change of scenery could benefit him very well. We'll see if he ends up transferring. But Taquan Roberson, who made his first big appearance for Penn State in the Iowa game, ended up losing that game. He entered the portal, committed to UConn. I think that was a great move for him considering the amount of talent Penn State has coming in to the quarterback room, not only in this freshman class, but you also have Sean Clifford returning for his 6th year. Who knows what's going to end up happening with this room, but I don't think Roberson was going to see any of those chips fall in his favor staying at Penn State, so I think a change of scenery will benefit him really well. And then Penn State also has already made some noise in the transfer portal as they picked up that wide receiver in Mitchell Tinsley from Western Kentucky, so bolstering that room a little bit more, it seems.
Yeah. So, let's go back a little bit to Noah Cain here. Up until 30 minutes ago, it was reported that is now official. Cain is entering his name in the transfer portal, and we'll kind of see what destinations he'll look into as we move along. I think maybe some SEC schools, maybe some other schools down south, because he does have connection to Louisiana, Texas, and Florida.
Check out Seth's article.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Talking about Mitchell Tinsley, this is a guy that I think is a perfect, bring in. I think this is great for Sean Clifford. I think it's great for Parker Washington to really space out that offense. I think we saw in the Outback Bowl, Parker Washington's a number 1 wide receiver, but it's hard for him to do it all on his own, especially when he's used to having a guy like Jahan Dotson by his side. I think Mitchell Tinsley coming in here is a guy who, he had 1,400 receiving yards last year and 14 receiving touchdowns, and people still don't know his name. That's a guy who just needed to come to a big-name school like Penn State and kind of show the world that he's legit. So that's a guy I think could really open up that offense, especially if the run game, isn't back to full form next season. That's something they might just have to rely on again. So that's someone who I'm looking forward to seeing as we move along. Other big names that they're looking at here, there are a couple guys from Alabama who entered the transfer portal today, actually. Jalen Moody is one of them, and Shane Lee is another. 2 middle linebackers, which could really fill that hole that Ellis Brooks left when he declared for the draft.
They're looking to fill 2 starting linebacker spots at this point with the addition of Brandon Smith going into the NFL as well. So the more experience they get there, the better. They won't miss a beat then.
Yeah, Curtis Jacobs is going to move over to Will. He was playing Sam last year. Jonathan Sutherland, they announced that he was going to move from safety to linebacker this year. He's going to play the Sam position. And then right in the middle of the field, it's really wide open. I don't think they're going to be that comfortable starting Tyler Elsdon week 1. I think you get a guy from Alabama, either Shane Lee or Jalen Moody. I think that's, a great pickup for Penn State and, great experience. And it should be mentioned, Shane Lee, when he was being recruited out of high school, he took 4 visits to Happy Valley. So, he's no stranger to the program. He's no stranger to James Franklin. And one of those visits did happen to be Penn State's whiteout win over Ohio State in 2016. Just leave that there for you.
Very convincing.
Yeah, and so who are some other transfer guys you like on the offense?
Yeah, I think that a position that Penn State needs to address going into next season with respect to the transfer portal is the offensive line. I mean, we saw a lot of younger guys at that position in the Outback Bowl, and it just really was not working out in Penn State's favor. So I really think that this is a position at which they need to get experience in order to be successful next year, whether they're starting a true freshman quarterback or your 6th-year quarterback in Sean Clifford. So some guys that have entered the transfer portal, I mean, one of them, redshirt senior from Tennessee, Rajon Calbert, just entered today. I mean, he's got a lot of experience at Tennessee. That's a program that's been on the rise lately, so I think that he would be a great fit for this program. And then also Cornell transfer Hunter Norzad taking a visit to Penn State this month. So we'll see what happens with these 2 guys, but I think that the offensive line is definitely a position Penn State needs to address in the transfer portal. I mean, you can't really just shove guys in there that are true freshmen and redshirt freshmen and sophomores into that position if you want to be successful and establish dominance. So that's something that was a problem this year. They need to get quality experience in that position. So I think that that's what they need to address in the transfer portal. So with that, let's move on to some of the younger guys that are now enrolled at Penn State, early enrollees for the spring semester. I don't think the importance of getting to campus early and starting to get training at the college level can be stated enough. I mean, they're really getting experience against Penn State's starters, Penn State's quality backups right away. And as I've stated multiple times before on this podcast, experience at the college level is invaluable, whether that's in training, in games. It just cannot be stated enough. So I'm very excited to see and hear about how these younger guys are doing. And there's a lot of big-ticket names that are in Penn State's program right now as true freshmen. So, Seth, what do you think about early enrollees so far?
Yeah, well, it's hard not to get excited about the offensive talent that's come to Penn State pretty early. The big name is Drew Aller from Medina, Ohio, and that's a guy who some want him to start as a true freshman. We'll kind of have to see how spring practice goes.
That's another podcast episode.
So that's a guy, big arm talent. Everyone kind of knows about him. He's arguably the top quarterback in the recruiting class. And then Nick Singleton is a guy, in the backfield he's comparable to Miles Sanders and Saquon Barkley. Just a guy who's really an all-around talent. You can put him in the backfield. He'll breeze through defenders. You can honestly put him in the slot too and make some work there, which is something that made Saquon so great when he was at Penn State. Another guy I like is Katron Allen. Singleton might be the true third down back, but Katron Allen's a guy you plug in the red zone, you plug him at the goal line, he'll push through defensive linemen. Like he doesn't care. He's tough. He's mean, and that's just a guy. That it's just good to have that on your roster when you're trying to make a well-rounded offense. There's some other guys. Jerry Cross is just a huge tight end.
Yeah.
He's about 6'8", so he's going to come in here. He hasn't played too much over the past couple of years, dealing with some injuries, but I think spring ball will be a great time for him to just get back on the field and face some true collegiate talent. And then on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot to like. When you look at the All-American Bowl, Penn State had Drew Aller, they had Nick Singleton, they had Keon Wiley, and the best player who played was Denai Dennis Sutton, and it wasn't even close. He was arguably the best defensive player to play that day, and he's a guy that I think is just going to come in and
Could he compete for a starting spot right away?
I don't think he could compete for a starting spot right away just based on experience alone. But I think as the season moves along, you'll start to see him, kind of get some heavy minutes, almost similar to the minutes that Kalen King got this past season in the secondary. I think that Dani, he's similar to Yetur, but he's also a hybrid like Micah Parsons, where, he's a D lineman. He's not an edge rusher. He's not a linebacker. He's a D lineman who happens to be playing defensive end. And he's going to push through a bunch of offensive linemen. He's going to be a scary sight to see for a lot of these Big Ten teams for years to come.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how they do perform in spring ball. Obviously, we'll get to see them at the blue and white game. But I really think that the importance of these offensive guys can't be stated enough. I mean, I'm excited to see how the quarterback competition starts up. I mean, you just discussed Drew Aller. There's also 3-star Bo Perbula that are coming in, 2 of really the best quarterback prospects that Penn State's had come to Penn State in recent memory. So it'll be interesting to see how that battle shapes out with Sean Clifford. So, and as you said, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, they could really bolster this running back room to the next level. I mean, they're going to have, barring he doesn't enter the transfer portal too, Kevon Lee coming back. So you could see, I'm interested to see if they can develop kind of a 1-2 punch like Michigan had this year with Haskins and Blake Corum. So, and these 2 guys, they've had a lot of success at the high school level. Obviously, they showed out in those all-star games. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they develop given some tougher competition here at Penn State. But anything else we want to say about these guys before we move on to our next recruiting topic?
Yeah, I think another thing is you can't talk about the early enrollees and forget to talk about Caden Saunders, who's a pretty dynamic wide receiver. He's similar to Jahan Dotson, but he's got a little bit of Parker Washington in him as well. He's a guy, he's speedy, he is athletic. He's kind of just an all-around talent when it comes to the wide receiver position. And that's a guy, who I could see getting some heavy playing time his freshman year as well. The wide receiver room is looking to be, arguably Penn State's strongest positional group this upcoming season when you take into account, Parker Washington is already on his way to becoming the next, great Penn State wide receiver. You add Mitchell Tinsley to the list. You add Caden Saunders to the list. Lambert Smith is only improving. Mega is now on his way up too. So there's just a bunch of guys that they can rely on. It's just a matter of whether Sean Clifford has time with that offensive line, but hopefully the transfer portal can help some things out there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, last topic of the day. Seth, we're going to get into Junior Day. Want to explain a little bit about what Penn State has to look forward to this month in terms of recruiting?
I mean, you talk about the early enrollees, and there's a lot to look forward to there. But now we're moving on to 2023 here. So Junior Day is coming up this upcoming weekend, and it's going to be huge for Penn State. Multiple 4-star recruits coming in. Just some notable guys here that we should touch on is Samson Okunlola is an offensive tackle from Massachusetts. He's going to come in. He's a top 100 prospect. He's deciding between Penn State, Georgia, Virginia, and Tennessee. Those are his big 4. So Junior Day, could serve as an important day for a lot of these prospects that are kind of unsure about Penn State. They're not going to work out. That's not what Junior Day is. It's not workouts. They'll come in. They'll tour the facilities. They'll meet the coaches, take some pictures, really just get the feel. And then on the other side, coaches aren't going to see them play football. They're just going to see, are these guys really as big as these high school coaches have told us? Like, is this guy legit? And it's possible that some of these, lower name guys that you might not know about walk away with some offers. So some other guys, other than Okunlola that I think, that are coming in on Saturday, I think potentially could be Nittany Lions in the future. Dylan Gooden is an edge rusher from Olney, Maryland. Interesting thing about him, Doc Gooden, former MLB pitcher, ace on the Mets and Yankees. His son is Dylan Gooden. Dylan Gooden's coming in for a visit on Saturday. He already visited Penn State back in June. This is a guy who's kind of deciding between Penn State and West Virginia, so this could serve as, a good time for Penn State to show what they got for him. Tamir Robinson, in-state linebacker. He's from Pittsburgh, so that's a guy you definitely want to bring into your class.
That in-state dominance.
I know Manny Diaz is a linebackers coach. Would love to bring him in, an in-state guy. John Walker is a defensive lineman. He'll be coming in, 4-star. He likes Florida State, but he also likes Penn State. It was included in his top 7. And then on Sunday, a day after Junior Day, Penn State will get a look at just one guy here. He's a top 100 offensive line prospect, Javen Williams, who's, he's been heavily tied to Penn State over the past couple months. He's being recruited by Troutwine. And, that's a guy that Penn State would love to get to kind of bolster that O-line, especially when you talk about in the middle there at the guard position. So that's pretty much it when it comes to Junior Day. It's important. It's really important. It's the first steps in really defining Penn State as a true powerhouse for the 2023 recruiting class. And they'll have 2 already committed guys there. Joey Schlaffer and Lamont Payne will be there as well to make sure things go smoothly.
Yeah, and I think that Penn State's work on the recruiting trail was shown heavily in the class of 2022. James Franklin talked about how important it is to identify guys very early on in the recruiting process and in their high school careers. We saw it with Drew Aller. He was rated, a 3-star prospect when he committed to Penn State, and he was upgraded to a 5-star by the end of his high school career. And he'd already committed to Penn State. So just identifying guys like that and what their talent and potential is going to be extremely important going forward for Penn State, especially if they want to keep this defense that Brent Pry really built from the ground up. Now they're strong in all facets of it instead of just banking on LBU all the time. So I think that it's going to be very important, as you said, Junior Day, to really build up on this recruiting and keep it going, because we've seen it pay off with the class of 2022. It's one of the top ranked classes that Penn State's brought in recent memory. So I just think it's going to be really important for the years to come. It's going to be great to see if any commitments come out of that. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Collegian Football Podcast. For Seth Engle, I'm Alexis Yoder, and we'll see you here next time.